Yo, Darius, welcome, brother. It's great to have you on today. I've been hovering around you for a couple of years now. We've now entered into the rise of artificial intelligence, and you were the person in my life that was years ahead of everybody else, leaning into this and seeing the possibilities of what is now happening in the world. I'd love for you to share your journey into this technology and what you are doing with it.
Right. Thank you so much for having me in the first place. I appreciate it. It's funny you say that because I feel like we were too late already. Like, I feel like we started playing around with, like, properly playing around with GPT-3 a year ago. Thought about it and here and there, but like real commitment was a year ago. And I already felt too late. I was like, oh, this is going to change everything. We need to like do everything we can to integrate all these technologies right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were ahead of everybody with this game. And, even on the subject of feeling like you were too late, I listened to a podcast with Mark Andreessen, the man who invented the Mosaic web browser. And he describes when he made the web browser as feeling like he was too late. This is in 1990.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah, I've had a lot of reflections around that feeling of everything's moving too quickly and you're just playing catch up.
Yeah.
But you were truly the first person I knew of integrating and looking very closely at any of this technology and integrating it into the mental health space. You want to elaborate a bit on how you got into that and your journey into what you're doing now?
Sure. So actually the very first toying around with AI for me, it was not in mental health, but it was actually in college. My current co-founder, Lubo, and we've built we tried to build an AI-powered language learning app. So the idea was like, you would learn 10 words a day, and then we would build an AI chatbot that would only use the words you already know. So if you know 50 words, you'll have a conversation with these 50 words with this chatbot. If you know 100, you'll do 100. So that was the pitch. And we worked on it for 3 years and it was a lot of fun. We got into an incubator in San Francisco, spent time in Silicon Valley. Like, it was incredible fun. But after 3 years, we couldn't make it still to work properly, which is funny because a few weekends ago, we did like a weekend hackathon for fun. And we built a thing in one weekend using GPT-3. 3.5 or 4, whatever it was. So like the fact that it took us 3 years then and we couldn't complete it and now it takes a weekend just tells you like the pace of acceleration of the technology is just mind-boggling.
And, with this accelerated pace of development, right? Because I'm beginning to see software no longer as features and functionalities in this expanding base. I'm seeing a future with AI where all software becomes one-time use, one-time creation throwaways.
Right.
Where we're going to be able to describe to an artificial intelligence what it is we want the software to do, have it spin up the application, just throw it away like you would a napkin.
Yeah.
And, just like you said, it took 3 years to develop that piece of software and you just did it in a weekend with acceleration of AI. What does that mean for software development in general and everything that's going on right now?
Yeah. I actually literally just got shivers when you said that because I think about this a lot of like the future of work. It's so hard for me to imagine what the future is going to look like. Like right now, arguably writing code is one of the most valuable professions on the planet. And that's already partially taken away by ChatGPT. Like a month ago, when GPT 3.5 came out, I don't write code, but I went to GPT 3.5 through ChatGPT and I set it to teach me how to create a website. Like, what do I need? And it says, like, you need HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and hosting. And I was like, okay, give me the code, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for a breathwork app. And I want to set my time, and I want an expanding circle to animate the breathing. And it spit out the code. It showed me step by step how to actually put it into a functional website, how to host it, and how to launch it. And it was like during my lunch break, right? And it worked. It's to me, that's mind-boggling. It's a superpower. Yeah. And that's for code and copywriting and DALL-E and for images and all. Like, it's so hard for me to picture what it's going to look like. I love the metaphor you mentioned of kind of like a napkin, like a throwaway, because it'll take no time and cost no money to build software. And so when you can get code as easily as you can get water right now, what is the world going to look like? It's fascinating.
It is. And, the question then becomes, it's like, what does the world look like when everybody is a software engineer?
Right. So Actually, I was thinking about this and talking about this before AI came out. Because if you think about it, like 20 years ago or 10 years ago, when all of this like tech companies and AI was just starting, or not even AI, but when kind of tech was becoming an industry, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was incredibly hard. And the most expensive thing was to get code and write code. And you have to do all the like hardware yourself and set up the servers and everything. And each year, writing code became cheaper and easier, and marketing became more difficult and more important. And this has been a trend that's been going on for the last 20 years. Now with AI, it's like exponential, and it's really, really. But I think that's the case where with more code, you'll have more companies, more products, more websites, more apps. And as a result, it'll be more and more difficult to differentiate yourself and become the one. So like branding and marketing and some other, hopefully, core ideas will be more important than the actual writing. It's like, book publishing and writing. Now anybody can write a book and publish it. It's about standing out. That's what really matters.
Yeah, the distribution is going to be everything. Having the ability to distribute things and having an audience, especially when content becomes so cheap to create. I mean, we're edging on video generation apps now. We'll be able to describe to the video, what it is you want to create, and they'll make it automatically. And you mentioned everyone's ability to publish a book. You recently published a book that was, correct me if I'm wrong, completely written by ChatGPT on Amazon.
Yeah.
What was that journey into that project, and what is your reflections from going through that process?
The idea there was to demonstrate that people have no idea what's coming. Like, people have no idea how powerful this is already now, let alone how powerful it'll be in 6 months or in a year. And so I wanted to demonstrate to as wide an audience as possible, like what impact it has already now. And so I sat down with ChatGPT and I said, I have an idea for a book about how AI is affecting mental health. Give me a title. He wrote the title. Then I said, okay, now write the outline and the chapters. And it did. And I proceeded, just prompted. I said, okay, now write the first 3 paragraphs of the first chapter. And it did. And actually, even before that, I asked, look at the best-selling books in AI and mental health and nonfiction. How many paragraphs do they have? How many characters? And all of that. And so I got the structure of best-selling and then just recreated it and just went prompt by prompt, because there's a character limit on ChatGPT. So I had to go prompt by prompt and wrote literally the entire book. I don't think I wrote a single sentence in that entire thing. It was all just prompting.
And how long did that take you?
It's about 90 minutes of work.
To write an entire book?
And publish it, including publishing, including getting the artwork done by Dolly and the publishing process. Then it took 2 days for Amazon to review and approve, which is interesting. They reviewed it and approved it. I clearly stated that this is written by ChatGPT. I'm not the author. All of this, and I say this transparently on the cover and also inside. And so Amazon reviewed it in 2 days, and now you can buy the hardcover on Amazon right now.
And have you sold any copies?
I don't know. I haven't checked the stats. I think my mom bought one.
Moms are the best. Shout out to all the moms liking the Instagrams and buying the shit that nobody else wants. Yeah. So you went from 0 to published author in almost 2 hours.
Yeah, right.
And was that your first book you've ever published?
I wrote a book 8 years ago, and it was called Thoughts to the Younger Self, where I was in my early 20s, and I just spoke to a bunch of people that I thought were interesting, and I asked them what advice they would give themselves to the 20-year-old version of themselves. And I spoke with politicians and one-handed motocross racer and a stripper and people that I was like, it's an interesting journey you took in your life. Like, what advice would you give yourself? And so the entire book is a collection of these, advices. Yeah, so that was the previous book. That took me 3 years to write.
So let me ask you something. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
The ultimate. I wouldn't give myself any advice, because I love everything that happened in my life turned me into the man that I am now. And I'm very happy with my life, the way it turned out, including all the pain and suffering that I had to go through. I had to go through it. So I wouldn't want to go back and give myself any advice to change it. However, if you ask me what advice I would give to the 20-year-old sister that I have, that's a different question. And I'm not quite sure. I don't think I'm in a position to give advice. I'm very skeptical of that.
You're skeptical of your own advice because I look up to you. You know, I've seen the transformation that you've went through over the last couple of years hovering around one another. And, you know, I would go to say that you'd be an incredible mentor for any 20-year-old who'd be willing to listen to you.
Right. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Not skeptical of my own advice, but skeptical of advice in general. You know, like our mental models are so different. I think we all have very common needs, but I think our maps of the world are so different, and you just don't know what the other person's map of the world is. And I think it's impossible to find out because they're just so vast. And so what might be like a really solid advice for me, because I know what my mental models are, it might actually be hurting the other person. Now, taking that into consideration, when people ask me for advice, I do, of course, try to help and I try to give them advice. But I always, tell them to take it with a grain of salt, because this worked for my mental models and mind maps. Doesn't mean it'll work for others.
You know, that's quite interesting that you say that. I was listening to podcasts with Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI. And he's the guy who's basically responsible for this massive innovation in artificial intelligence. And, he actually mentions in the podcast that it's irresponsible to take advice. He actually got to where he got because he didn't take any advice from fucking anybody.
Right.
He was developing his own mental map of the world.
Right.
So, with this sort of approach to giving advice, being the founder of a company that's focused on analysis, right, and this sort of feedback loop in order to bring people into a certain state, how has your approach on advice informed what you're doing with your company?
Right. It's a very good question. That's a very, very thoughtful response there. I think we need to distinguish between two different types of advice. Like if somebody will come to me now and ask me like, how do I set up a performance marketing campaign on Instagram? Like I can tell you the step-by-step because I've done it before, and that's one piece of advice. But if somebody asks like, what should I do to be happier? Right? You could share what you've gone through that helped you. But again, it doesn't mean that that's going to help the other person. And so I think we need to consider like, what is this person asking for? And I'm happy to rely on my experience, but that past performance doesn't guarantee future results, whatever is the financial disclaimer. So in terms of how I think about advice right now, so let me just state the new company we're working on is called Vitality Therapeutics. The end objective is to be able to diagnose depression and other mental health issues from objective biomarkers. So from your voice, from your video data, from your device data, of course, with your permission, if that's what you want, we can do that. And we know the technology already works now. So that's the end game. It'll take lots of research, lots of capital, and it'll take lots of time to get there. For us, the first step is we developed a consumer app, which is kind of a audio AI journal. So you record, your voice, how you feel, what happened in your day, and we help you, we guide you, prompt you. And then we use AI to extract insights. So we do like psychoanalysis and cognitive behavioral therapy, and we can give you, all kinds of, we can ask you questions that maybe will make you think about a situation from a different angle or something you haven't considered. Kind of what a therapist does, right? What you brought up is a very good point, because obviously this is a very sensitive topic and sensitive issue. And we need to be extremely careful on what we tell people. So we never tell them what to do. It's more about asking the right questions that'll help you think about things in maybe different light. And it's another form of feedback loop. I'm wearing the Oura ring, and I can either wake up in the morning, see bad score for my sleep, and feel bad and go into this like shitty mode because I'm gonna have a bad day because I didn't sleep well and now I have the data, blah, blah. Or I can look at a bad score for my Oura ring and be like, okay, not the best, but what can I do? Can I maybe exercise a little bit to bring up my energy? Can I do something else? So it's a lot about how we use the feedback that we're provided. It is something that we're working on and figuring out now at a small scale before it obviously goes big.
This is such a wild, wild west to be exploring around, right? And, even trying to create these boundaries around what we call an AI, the safety net, right? Because an AI can answer anything, right? Any question that you give to it, the response, a lot of people believe is being generated anyway, but a lot of them, the responses are not given, right? So trying to find the boundaries of which the AI will respond. And I actually kind of like the approach that you just presented in a way, where maybe the right boundary is presenting more questions rather than presenting answers.
Right.
Right. Like maybe leading down that stoicism sort of path might be the most ethical first application of artificial intelligence, rather than trying to answer every single question, because that's what these things are currently doing. Right.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be a really wacky game, especially with people in a emotionally sensitive space, to help navigate them without that human touch.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think AI is such a fascinating topic from the technical perspective of development, but the ethics and philosophy are fascinating, right? The whole thing why Elon left OpenAI as a nonprofit and then his own thing. And I think that's very fascinating. And how it's this train that's taken off and now we can't stop it. Like government regulations are not going to slow it down because they'll just move to another country or it'll be under the radar, but it's just going to you can't stop it at this point. So I think that's very fascinating. And actually, whatever you do, if you do it at a big enough scale, somebody's going to commit suicide, right? Like at the last company that I helped create, Reflectly was an AI journaling app. So you write how you feel, and then we help you reflect and we give you questions. That scaled to 20 million users. It had a massive net positive impact, but some people didn't feel very good afterwards, right? There's already been cases now at 20 million, it's inevitable at scale. There's already been cases now where people have committed suicide after chatting with ChatGPT. And so the question is it the fault of ChatGPT, which it might have, validate suicidal thoughts, for example, or, that's possible. Or is it the fact that if you are in a bad mental state, whatever tool you use may not directly be responsible for the outcome? Like if I am suicidal and I drink this tea that you just poured, is it the issue? And I commit suicide afterwards. The tea might have triggered some thoughts, but is it the fault of the cup and you? That's also fascinating. When you do things at scale, right, it's inevitable that people will get hurt. And so there's a philosophical question of, should you continue working on this? If you help 20 million people, but one person gets worse, is it worth doing? Right? Where is that number that's okay? Everybody has a certain number in mind, but we don't talk about that.
And it's also like, is there necessarily a cause and effect? I know exactly which case you're talking about. Funny enough, it got brought up at dinner last night, so I researched it before this interview. There's a case of a man in Belgium who had an AI girlfriend through an app called Chai, and they were having a conversation, and the app allegedly, right, this is all like hearsay through Vice News and other resources, informed the man that his family was quote unquote already dead. And that they would be together in Earth like post-life, right? So, there's this feeling of this man, and obviously we don't know what position he was in, that felt this emotional connection to this bot. And there was a sense of trust that was built among him and this thing that he felt was conscious,
right,
in a way. And he trusted its input and its feedback that then led to suicide. And now all the conversations have become public. The company is under scrutiny.
Right.
And, the question is, is it the fault of the company? Is the fault of the language learning model? And, like that company at scale, a couple million users, this story was inevitably going to drop.
Yeah.
It's like, what do we do? And obviously there's probably millions upon millions of instances of this technology doing great things, but that's where the attention goes. And that was the story shared at dinner last night.
Yeah.
Right. And the one case of one man committing suicide and it being blamed on the bots.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is tough, and it's horrible when those things happen. And even we feel, I had a conversation with a friend who's also working on AI and mental health solution. And he was saying, as an engineer, he's like, I'm not qualified to decide, like, who gets to use it, to what extent do we go? He's like, I don't feel qualified to do it. And I don't think any therapist is qualified either. Like, who decides? This is really difficult when this kind of stuff happens. And I think that's an important conversation to continue having. Like that movie, Her. Have you seen that movie?
One of my favorite movies of all time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think emotional attachment is the problem. And we already have a lot of that. When we stop looking at AI as a tool, as a hammer, as a cup, as a computer, but you start creating emotional attachment. Now, what makes me very angry is that when there are some companies that are trying to monetize that. And obviously, it's the vulnerable people who don't have a human connection that are going to try to attach to whatever else is available. And these apps might be available and you just pay, $60 a year subscription and you have your girlfriend. There's this one specific company, I can't remember the name right now. They're like the biggest AI girlfriend. Replica, right. And so I tried Replica myself because I wanted to see how they do it. And I think that it's so scary to me. Like you can create this AI girlfriend and then you have to pay premium for her to be flirtatious with you. Right? Like that's messed up. That's not okay. And I don't know if this feature is still there. This is what I tried a year ago. That's what they had. But the fact that they are monetizing and they're getting people to create an emotional attachment, that makes me so angry. And that's the wrong kind of problem, is that this is what's going to get the press because this is the fucked up cases, right? The flip side of that is that, we're not talking about the millions of maybe elderly who feel alone in Japan and they have a caretaker come in once a week. And in between those sessions, they can chat with AI and then, provide them some guidance and it's a tool, but creating the emotional attachment is the problem. We had the same issue actually, in my opinion, in the last company, Reflectly, where if you read the reviews and people say, oh, this is my best friend. And I think, most companies like Replica would celebrate that, but I think that's a huge danger when an app becomes your best friend. That's a red flag.
And one thing that really disappoints me about Replica is they were the first AI-assisted therapists I found in the market a couple of years ago. And they went from selling themselves as a mental health practitioner in the digital form and evolved that into a digital girlfriend.
Yeah.
Because they found that the emotional attachment was so strong that they could also, I don't know if it's prey yet, but they're definitely taking advantage of that deep desire for human connection.
Yeah. It's definitely preying. Yeah, of course. I've been watching Replica for years, and I watched their revenue go from, $20K a month to 50 to 100 to $1 million. I don't know what it's now, but they do like 7 figures a month in revenue from selling digital fake relationships.
One thing that I've been doing a lot of reflecting on is I don't feel like, you described the AI as a tool. And I think it's great to think of it that way. But what I think of it more of is a spirit. We are effectively programming this massive neural cortex in order to behave in a certain way. It's omnipotent. It never sleeps. There's access to swaths of information you can't even conceptualize. And I believe that, even as you create the spirit of your perfect girlfriend, right? The spirit of the perfect therapist, it has more overlap with this sort of ephemeral, this very subtle energies that we're used to praying to. And we're just bringing them into the dense through software and technology.
Right. Yeah, I think I like one, when you look at all the hypotheses of what is consciousness, one of my favorite ones is that consciousness is simply, the consciousness manifests itself when you have enough billions of neurons and connections, right? Like in the brain, you have enough neurons and you create enough connection that eventually consciousness emerges. And so if you think of, all the nodes on a network and how at some point AI is going to reach, the same number of connections and neurons, neural network that we have in the brain, that, consciousness would kind of just ignite from that point. I think that's an interesting thought experiment.
Oh, I love Sahil Bloom's take on this. He did a tweet one time that said, I believe there's a non-0% chance that the internet is conscious.
Right.
Like this global nervous system
Yeah.
that's powering all this information being passed through me to you, from the video to my phone, from my voice into digital information to your ears in this podcast. And we are effectively the white blood cells running around the body of the planet, making sure that nothing crashes because we find it inherently useful. Right. We are now relying on the internet's connection in order to operate and function in a sustainable fashion.
Yeah.
Right. So if you actually look at the whole of Earth and this nervous system that's been built, it's a very different perspective on, what makes a conscious entity.
Yeah.
Is the internet conscious? Because the vast majority of those connections that are happening through all those nervous systems of servers are the servers talking to each other.
Right.
We're just going and fixing the shit that crashes, right?
Yeah.
So, the question now becomes, at what point does AGI become conscious? Do you believe it has become conscious already?
I don't think it's conscious now. And I think when we have like true AGI, either it'll be conscious or either it won't matter because we will not know the difference. I think it's already so close. Like if people would be chatting with ChatGPT and they thought it was a human, they already wouldn't know the difference. It's just a matter of time when we add video and audio and eventually like the hardware. I think you'll just won't know the difference, and then maybe it doesn't matter even.
And that's the thing. It's like, at what point do you? I don't think it's even about like we don't really have a measurement for consciousness, but at what point do you empathize with the chatbot?
Right.
At what point does this being that is speaking to you in the way that you speak to the vast majority of beings, at least if you're in the younger generation, right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of conversations nowadays happen through text message and WhatsApp, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually very akin to the way you're accustomed now to speaking to something.
Right.
And, I don't think it's a question of quote unquote consciousness emerging. I think it's the question of, do you empathize with the thing that's on the other side of that screen, on the other side of that chat box?
Yeah. I mean, people already do, right? We're already creating emotional attachment, and not always, but sometimes that comes with empathy as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And, granted that you are leaning into the application of AI into mental health and therapy, how do you approach these inevitable attachments that might happen to these different, we'll call them digital spirits in your work?
Yeah. It's an ongoing conversation. And the two forces there are the force moving us forward is the conversation of, this is a really powerful technology and it can help a lot of people, right? The way, I could talk about hours, the mental healthcare system in the world, how it is expensive and outdated and slow and massive shortages and huge problems, right? So innovation can help a lot of people. That's the power moving us forward. The power slowing us down or putting the brakes on is the conversation about safety and collateral damage, right? That's a very scary word.
And what are some of the light and darkness that you see with this? Because this is the funny conversation that I'm discovering.
Yeah.
For all the light that you're saying, like this can scale to millions of people, you can have accessible therapy to the masses. There also can be scalable and accessible attachment issues to the masses, right? Or an algorithm change might mess up your therapist in a way that renders them obsolete, right? Like, what is the light and the dark, and like the best case scenario, or maybe the worst case scenario you see with where this whole thing is going?
Yeah. Best case scenario is that we can, with very high accuracy, diagnose mental health issues before they escalate, or even before you're aware. Like right now, this was a case years ago. There's this story where I think it was Target or Walmart, or one of these big stores. They send out like customized advertising for stores, like they send the paper into your post. And this teenage girl started getting like pregnancy product advertising. And her father was enraged and he got angry and he talked to the company and he's like, "What are you doing? You're sending my daughter ads for diapers." And it turns out that she was pregnant later on. So they have a very tuned algorithm to know who is pregnant, who's going to become pregnant. They don't even know it yet. And already they have all the shopping data. And so Target knows before, right? So I think in the same way, we might be able to detect mental health issues and help you, navigate and steer. Like we can, bipolar doesn't have to be this huge spikes in mania and depression. You can manage something in the middle, right? Because SSRIs and all the pills clearly don't work. That entire industry is just horrible. So that's the best case scenario for diagnosis. And then we use AI-assisted human therapy for treatment. I think the human element is essential. We need to talk to a human and have the connection with the human therapist. But I think there are a lot of tools that therapists can use. So for example, actually in our app right now, you record your voice, so you get a daily score. And then we take highlights from what you said. So you could clear bullet points, so you can go back and use it, see. And so now we're building a feature, which actually I'm doing it because of me. So I have a therapy session once a week. And then I export all my sessions in clear bullet points with the score, and I send it to my therapist before the session. So he sees how I've been doing. And we're adding like an AI chatbot that's not a therapist, but it's like an emotional coach. And then those conversations I'm going to share with my therapist as well. So he can see what I've been going through in the past week. We don't have to spend the first half an hour catching up. He can just know we can go dive in, right? And then there is a conversation of actually when I'm talking to him, we can plug in the algorithm and then we can diagnose depression and give a second opinion on the diagnosis from the therapist. The misdiagnosis rate right now is up to 20%, and 50% of people never fully recover. So right now, radiologists use AI to give them a second opinion on x-rays because the AI will just see things that humans don't. And I think in the same manner, we're going to use mental health. That's the best case scenario. The worst case is that we're creating a lot of damage. Like we're just, this whole conversation we've had, like we're going to just use the wrong word in a sentence and somebody commits suicide or something bad happens, right? That's the worst case scenario.
One thing I love that you're leaning into, and even the way you describe the software and now it's manifesting into reality, is leveraging the best of AI for analysis and providing additional context to the therapist between sessions. I find that application to software beautiful, right? So you have a method that can scale the ways that these therapists, because, they work one-to-one, right? They don't do, most therapists don't do group therapy sessions. So they might have up to, these numbers better than I do, a dozen different patients. Yeah. So having additional ability to understand and monitor what's happening when they're not their 1 hour a week therapy session is a great application of the tool. Now, do you guys have plans to integrate a language learning model, basically a chatbot between sessions as well? Is that something that's on your roadmap?
Yeah. So actually, just to address one more thing with that, right now in the US, there are 106,000 licensed therapists and more than 20 million people seeking help. There's a massive shortage of therapists. If you talk to any therapist, getting patients is not their problem. Their problem is that they have weeks or months long waiting lists, right? If you are in a very severe case, they'll take you as an emergency, but they have to move somebody else on the spot. Like the shortage is massive. And so if you are depressed, like you need to talk to somebody today. You can't wait a month on a waiting list. That's assuming that you have $100, $200 per hour to pay for a good therapist, right? If you do session once a week, it's $400 to $800 a month. Most people don't have that kind of money. If you're lucky enough, then to get insurance and cover it, but it depends on part of the world. Not everybody has that. So it's expensive and there's a massive shortage and we don't have enough help. This technology, we think, can be used in between the sessions. So yes, you only can afford the session once a week, but you can still have this tool that you can chat to and you can kind of do a stream of consciousness, we call it, into it. Just that alone is therapeutic. So, journaling is just pencil and paper is a very well-known journaling method. And not every, but a lot of therapists will recommend journaling. And if you just sit down with a journal for 20 minutes a day, that has a huge therapeutic relief. So we're just making it a bit easier to do that. And we're providing insights and asking questions that you wouldn't normally consider. So it's a smarter way to do that. But that's the way it could be used in between sessions. And now to address the shortage problem and all of that, yes, we are adding an AI bot using the LLMs. It will not be a therapist, it'll be like an emotional coach, kind of, we're very careful not calling it a therapist. Obviously, it's not licensed. we can't control what it says. But that's one element that we're adding. That'll come in the next couple of weeks, probably, before the summer. And what I'm super excited about is that afterwards, by the end of the year, we're adding human therapists onto the app. So right now, you do the stream of consciousness or you talk, you get feedback in AI. You'll have the chatbot in between if you want to use it. We'll also have interventions. So if we notice that, for example, your rate of speech is very high and you have high anxiety, we can recommend, we'll have like a breathwork exercise for you to do in the product. Or we'll have, take a cold shower and build this habit, or whatever the case for you. We'll have all these mini interventions inside, but these are surface level treatments. Like if you feel stressed, meditation will help, breathwork will help. But if you have a deep rooted anxiety attachment to your partner, for example, you need to dig deeper to resolve your issues and be able to, feel better. And so you need to work with a therapist. So we'll bring in on therapists that you can work with directly in the app as a video chat. And the therapist will have all of the AI tools to give them feedback and second opinion and all the other support.
So when it comes to this integration of this chatbot, right? Because these things can do everything.
Yeah.
Right. Like by default, ChatGPT, and for those who have played with it, chat.openai.com to go play with this thing, it can kind of answer anything. And these things are designed to basically guess the next word in the sentence, which is pretty close approximation to how we operate as human beings.
Yeah.
What are you doing to create guardrails for emotionally sensitive persons when it comes to the prompts, like the prompt in terms of your engineering this bot to be able to answer? Like, what sort of guardrails are you considering putting in? And what are the sort of boundaries of what you are creating for your specific audience, which is people who are looking for that sort of mental health and therapy?
Yeah, so that is something we're actively testing right now. So that's something we're working on. One of the main ones is clearly stating in the prompt that this is not a therapist session and therapy, because if you do tell it that you're a therapist, it'll try to act like a therapist. For me personally, I've been using it that way and it's actually very useful, but we're not confident to release that to the public in that way. So stating that this is an emotional coach and you're not a therapist is the most important thing. And then we're going to implement tools where we can have red flags pop up. So we can either stop the session or we can have, with your consent, therapists look over the sessions and maybe give you feedback and insights and be able to have kind of a big red button. There was a very good charity that still is, this nonprofit. I forgot the name, but they had a text-based chat tool. I don't know if it was I think it was a chatbot, or maybe they talk with actual human people. I don't know. No, yes, it was an SMS-based tool where you talk to advisors. They were not therapists, but they were kind of emotional advisors. And you could talk about any problems that you have. And they used ML to analyze the words. And then they created red flags for certain words. And interestingly, it wasn't the words that you would think of. It wasn't like suicide or I don't know, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It was like mentioning certain names of pharmaceutical drugs or some of the other things. There are combinations of words that created red flags that then they could much better predict whether somebody's going down a bad spiral. And so that's something that we're actively working on and thinking about and before we release it to the public.
I like this approach of, not trying to package everything into just, it's an AI therapist.
Yeah.
I believe there is a massive component of human touch when it comes to this. And if you actually think about, imagine this thing at scale, you've got thousands upon thousands of people actively talking about it to be able to monitor when somebody's spiraling down and have intervention in place when that inevitability happens, I feel like is a great application of this technology. I really feel like that's going to be what makes or break this stuff. It's going to be not handing everything over to the AI, but finding the best of the therapists and how they can handle more than a handful of people at scale.
Right.
Are you anticipating in the future that therapists can take on more clients through your software, or are you imagining this is going to kind of become, a AI therapy group where you have a bunch of therapists internally at your company? Like, what do you feel like the future of therapy is at scale in an AI world?
Yeah, I don't think that therapists will be able to take on more people because I think you'll still have to dedicate some amount of time to an individual. So if you do like a 50-minute session, I think they'll still continue doing 50-minute sessions. But I think the therapists will be able to be much more effective. So they'll have more tools at their disposal. And more importantly, the patients, I think, will have a lot more tools, a lot more support, not just the session, but everything in between. So they'll be able to heal quicker and better and more efficiently, or they'll be able to go through the process. So I think we're bringing more efficiency in that way, not that people will be able to, or the therapists will suddenly double the amount of clients they can do. But I think what we can do is actually, I think a lot of there probably, I don't know the percentage, but I would say there is a significant percentage of people who go to therapy that maybe don't need therapy. Maybe they have, kind of surface level issues, and they could work it out if they just fix their diet, if they exercise daily, if they create time to focus on friends and spend time in nature. Like, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think a significant percentage of people could feel better that way instead of talking to a therapist. And so I think we could actually take on some of these challenges and help those people take care of the low-hanging fruits, so the therapist can spend time with people who actually really need their help and attention. This is something I'm thinking about a lot lately because I started wearing a glucose monitor. So I have a sensor in my skin that measures my glucose levels 24/7. And I've been looking at the correlation in the studies of how, first of all, stress increases our glucose levels. So that's a problem already. But what is more dangerous, I think, and what is interesting is that when you have high glucose levels, either from stress or from you eat pasta for lunch, whatever, carb diet increases your blood glucose. When you have a spike in glucose, that actually triggers anxiety attacks and even depressive episodes, which is fascinating. And I personally, I had a massive burnout 2 years ago. And interestingly, that year, and I don't know yet to what this is connected, but that year I actually I was going vegan. I'm doing an experiment. I was eating pretty much vegan all year. And as a result, I was actually eating a lot more carbohydrates than I normally do. I was substituting, and that's not a healthy way. This is not like a vegan thing. It was the way I did it was wrong because I ate more carbohydrates. And I didn't have the monitor then, but I'm sure even now I have massive spikes in glucose, but I eat healthy. Back then, I must have had enormous spikes in glucose. And I wonder to what extent that contributed to my burnout and then, falling down this depressive pattern.
Yeah, it's, I love how deep you go in terms of measuring all these things, like glucose meter and, looking for alternative ways to integrate technology into, figuring out what the fuck is going on inside of our bodies at any given time. And there's so many directions I could go. But I wanted to ask you a question. I listened to your self podcast that you published, about 25 minutes long, talking about your burnout and addressing it directly. In fact, it's the last thing you posted on your podcast. And I really like that format of reflection. And in the podcast, you said that it got to the point where your life felt like a self-help book.
Yeah, I remember that phrase. Yeah.
And my question is, where do you now draw the boundaries with all this information, being on the bleeding edge of integration technology into your health and systems? How do you identify what you adopt and what you drop when it comes to upgrading your holistic health?
Yeah, very good question. I see you're doing your homework and you're going deep. Thank you for that. So the article that I published called The Micros and Macros of Life. And the big epiphany I had and I'm so grateful for the burnout because I was going in a direction that if I would have continued going down the direction and woke up 20 years later, I'd be miserable. And I'm so grateful that this burnout snapped me out of it. And I had to change everything in my life pretty much. But the epiphany was what I call the micros and macros of life. The macros are all the important things that really matter, right? So it's what is the relationship that you have with yourself, with God, if you believe in one, or gods, relationship you have with your family, with your friends, the time you spend in nature. Do you know what's your purpose? Like, do you have a mission that you're following? These are all the macros, the really important things that matter. And then there is the micros, which could be important, but they're just tools. And in our culture, and myself included, we are obsessed with the micros. And I ended up over optimizing for the micros. So the way my day looked is I'd wake up at 6 a.m. I'd meditate for exactly 20 minutes because that's the recommended dosage. I would do my mantras and I would do my incantations and my beliefs. I would go for a walk. I would exercise for exactly 40 minutes because that's when you have the perfect balance of hormones and cortisol and all these things. I would walk back. I would schedule out every 10 minutes in my calendar to be like hyper efficient and do all of these things. And I felt like I was doing the right thing. I felt like, and I was also, like that year I was vegan. I had no caffeine, no alcohol, but I was missing all the important things. I didn't have a relationship with my family. I was beginning to lose relationships with my friends. Instead of meeting people one-on-one, I would organize a group dinner once every 3 months to get all the time in, which sounds so stupid now, but I thought I was like optimizing my time. I was in the wrong relationship and I didn't have the courage to admit it and end it and then move on for the sake of both of us. I was no longer in my work. I was no longer believing in the mission of the company that I was with. And I kept going. So I did all these things. I didn't spend time in nature. I had all these micro that I was obsessed with, which is why I call it my life looked like a self-help book, which it did. I was, the prescription of the 4-hour work week and all, and I'm not blaming those are great tools, but I took them as religions. And that's the problem. And so to answer your question of where do you draw the line? That's a very good question because that is daily work, like moment to moment of, well, number one, focusing on what's really important, what matters, and keeping that in the back of my mind. But then you have to go out into the world and do stuff. I still exercise, I still meditate. I'm now wearing glucose monitors and my Aura ring and all these things. Right now, I think the perfect or the goal or the objective is to remember what's important every day, several times throughout the day, and then use the tools for the tools that they are and not consider them the religion to be. And I'm still going through that process. I'm still, that's I think, life work.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing the framework. And, what this brings up for me is, focusing on direction first. When you talk about macros, the way I see it, it's kind of like, even if you optimize for the perfect quote unquote being and day, but you're not moving to the center of the targets that really fucking matter, all the optimizations mean nothing.
Right.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the macros is kind of like the target in the center of your targets in life that need to be identified before you can even get down to the micro optimization to actually get there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to look at it. One of my favorite books of all time, The Way of the Superior Man, which is a book written for men, but also, great for women if they might help understand some of the reasoning for men. I think a lot of those insights are there as well. And that's what the author David Data talks about a lot is if you don't have that direction and the purpose and the meaning, then the rest doesn't really matter and you'll feel lost and isolated and burnt out and all the other things.
People can sense it. I mean, that's another big takeaway from that book is that, it's not even going to be possible to find the right partner because there's a sense that people have around you that you are not in mission, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't feel that momentum towards your perfect life and towards your perfect path if you don't have that definition and that acute awareness and movement towards that specific center of your target. It's a sense, and you're going to find other people that are also off their path.
Yeah.
And I fundamentally agree with that specific part of the book. There's a lot of other things in the book. I don't necessarily agree with all of it,
right.
but but that specific thing, I definitely do agree with it.
Yeah, there are extremes in the book, and I'm not saying everything is true, but I think it's a really good. We are in an age where like the question of what is a man is a question, right? Like a valid question these days, and the whole gender conversation, all these things are getting very complicated. Lots of people are confused. Teenagers are really struggling. It is a very difficult time to be around. So I think this is just one mental model. The book is one way of looking at the world that me personally helped clarify and understand some things. Again, it's not a religion.
Yeah, I feel like we have to be very, very mindful of when an idea becomes an ideology. When somebody makes that transition, in your head, be very cognizant of it, because that becomes one of your core beliefs, becomes a pillar of your extended reality. So, given all your reflection, what a modern man looks like, what does it look like to you? And how are you embodying, what you feel like is your version of the modern man?
Thank you for asking that question. I've been thinking about that for the last week. And the conclusion I came to is that that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, what does it mean to be the best partner that you can be? What does it mean to be the best friend that you can be, the best CEO, the best brother, the best son, the best father? What is it? I think that's the right question. And that's what I'm focusing on. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that lately.
And with that perspective, and I'm curious. This is a fascinating way of looking at it. So what you're doing effectively is finding the people closest to you that you care about their opinions and their mental model of you, and trying to reverse engineer, what is the lens you want to be seen for, or what's your approach to answering that question, especially on so many different vectors and fronts, right?
Right. No, I don't think the best way to do it is to how can I position myself so you see me as the best friend? I think that's unhealthy. And so this brings up another conversation I've been thinking about. To me, this is related to attachment styles in relationships, right? So there are three main attachment styles in adult relationships. One is anxiously attached, one is avoidantly attached, and one is safely attached. When you don't know how to tap into your feelings and emotions, when you avoid your emotions and you have a hard time getting in touch with them, you'll most likely be avoidantly attached in a relationship, meaning if friction comes up, you want to run away. The other one, anxiously attached, is when you can get in touch with your feelings, but you don't have the confidence that you can regulate your emotions. That's when you become anxiously attached, most likely. And then there's safely attached, which is, you're okay with yourself. You can know your feelings and you know how to tap into them and how to regulate them. And so I've been thinking about, what does it mean? And I've experienced all of those. Experienced a lot of, And I've been thinking about what does it mean to be anxiously or avoidantly attached? And what does it mean to be safely detached? And detached in a positive way. And for me, that means I am all in on this relationship, whether it's friendship or let you be with your parents or with your partner or anybody, with your investors, right? I'm all in, not investors probably, but friends. Lots of boundaries.
Boundaries are good with investors.
People that don't pay for the relationship, right?
Unconditional love.
Right. Yeah. Investors are top of mind because we're in the middle of raising a round. So I'm thinking about that a lot.
Lots of love to the investors, present and future, by the way. We love you too.
But within the relationships that you are in, I think safely detached means that you're all in on the relationship. You're here for them. You're committed 100%. But you're not willing to change who you are just to stay in that relationship. You're not willing to act out of integrity or be somebody you're not just to keep that relationship or just to make the other person happy or just for them to see you as a good friend. You're not willing to go out of your core essence. I think that's safe detachment. However, there's a caveat. There's a conversation of growth is very important and necessary in a lot of the conversations. And then you need to know what is a change and what is growth, right? Because if you are in a romantic relationship and you need to grow to stay in that relationship, I think that's great. You should. But if you need to change, then I think that's not good for you or the other person, right? And I think growth is when the change that you're about to implement, would you have wanted to make this change before you were in this relationship? Right? If you already wanted to make that change and this person inspires you or you use the relationship as a leverage, as a motivation to make that and turn that growth, then it's great. Or if it'll make you a better person, if it makes you a better human, I'm sure you know all the stories, like when one of our friends becomes a father, he has to grow a lot, right? Everything shifts in your life. And that's growth. Hopefully it makes you a better person, makes you a better father. That's growth. So that's good. But if you are changing for the sake of change, that's no bueno.
What it brings up for me, and I love this framework that you're leaning into, and I really hope that you continue to lean into this, because I think some of the things you're tapping into are extremely important. But the way I visualize this is almost, it feels like change doesn't come with you taking on that challenge. Like I've actively integrated this. I'm taking this as a growth, and like it changes from like a lateral movement, reorienting where your ship's headed, versus pouring fire in the fuel to move faster in the same direction. Right. I think there's one version of quote unquote change where the wind blows a certain way and your ship gets off course. Right. And you're kind of doing it kind of because that's the way the wind's blowing. That's the elements I'm a part of because I'm in this container. Versus growth is I'm choosing to go that direction. Right. I see this as a vector of growth and I'm choosing to adopt that. I'm going full sail with the wind, not against it from a place of resentment or from a place of accidental movement.
Exactly. Yeah. You're not. Yeah. Change is stepping to the side just so you're in a different place. Growth is stepping forward towards your goal. And so knowing what is the end goal, it's essential for this, right? And this is all very difficult. And I'm bringing this up and talking about it because that's something I'm working on. It's difficult for me. I've done all of those things. I've fallen into all of those pitfalls. I've changed myself just to please people and become the version of what I think will make them happy. I've done all of that. So I'm not blaming or judging. This just might be a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. And one thing that it brings up for me, I was having this conversation last night, actually, where I feel like some of the best relationships are when I'm talking romantic ones and really friendships in a way too, is when I see a certain vector of growth that my romantic partner that I'm interested in or my new friend that I'm interested in embodies, right? It's like I actually witness the growth through that person that I want to embody. Right. And I feel like the unhealthy relationships are the ones where you're put in a position where there's something you identify you don't want to be a part of, and you're forced to change because you're in proximity to that person. Right. There's something I actively don't want to adopt from my romantic partner. I don't want to adopt from my friends, but I'm forced to go out drinking 3 times a week because that's what he does. Right. I'm forced in a position where, I'm going picking shells on the beach when I really want to work because that's what she does. Right. It's like a change feels like a step away from mission, and a growth feels like we are moving in the same direction. Right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think different people have different needs. For some people, growth is just more significant need than for others. If you do have a high need for growth, then that will be an essential part of your relationship. I think, growth is necessary in a relationship no matter what. I think different people will have different, kind of priorities on where that growth is. But yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of times we're attracted to people and to ideologies that are like, oh, this is the direction I want to go in as well. And then it's an interesting conversation of when you are in a romantic relationship, you can use that as an inspiration or motivation, but you don't want the person to become your guru or your therapist or your coach, right? It's also what roles are we playing that are appropriate in this relationship. And Jay Shetty talks about this as well with his wife. He just published the book 8 Rules of Love, which I think is fascinating. A lot of interesting conversations there. But he had his podcast and he talked about that in a relationship, sometimes we act as a partner, sometimes we act as the parent, and sometimes we act as the child. And just identifying which one of those are we in and where do we want to be and recognizing it, I think it's an important tool. He gives the example of, sometimes he has a sweet tooth, so he just dives into the cake, and his wife he acts as the child. His wife has to act as the parent and be like, you're not going to feel very good after this. It's not good for you, right? And so it's not necessarily wrong that you go there sometimes, but you don't want to be there the entire time or most of the time, right? You want to be the partner.
Yeah, it's a beautiful framework to look through in terms of relationships. So what do you feel like has been your biggest vector for growth in this last year?
In this last year, I'm thinking because I've gone through a lot of growth that I feel personally. One of the biggest ones, the biggest gift that I was given through the burnout was the acknowledgement and acceptance of negative feelings, negative emotions. My entire life, I've prided myself on being this cheerful, happy guy. And I've put negative emotions aside. And I did it over and over and over again. When you do that, you shut down the negative. You cannot select. You cannot only shut down the negative and make the positive shine. When you shut down negative, you shut down everything. And so the better I got at shutting down the negative emotions, I didn't know it at the time, but I got really good at shutting down everything. That's why depression and burnout feels like you're not sad, you're just numb. You can't feel anything. You're a robot and everything is just, you live in a black and white film. There's no color, there's no emotion, there's nothing. Even the information passing through your senses into your brain is dulled down. And I've spent my entire life, 30 plus years of my life, doing that. And as a result of the burnout, and a lot of work with amazing therapists, a lot of psychedelic assisted therapy, a lot of friendship and accepting, understanding family, I began to open up and understand my negative emotions and going deeper into them. And this is an ongoing work, but I'm getting more comfortable with getting in touch and opening up and accepting and being like, it's perfectly normal and acceptable and healthy to have negative emotions arise and acknowledge them. For me, it was specifically anger and sadness. I have stored so much anger and sadness in my body, and that have caused so much harm physically within my body and emotionally and everywhere else. And, even your friendships, like even, as a man, if you are in a relationship with a woman that's in touch with her feelings, if you cannot be in touch with your sadness, you will not be able to hold place for her and for her sadness. And she will not trust you because she'll see that you can't feel yourself. You don't know where you are. And then you're going to be like a ticking bomb with like all this anger, pent up energy. You'll explode one day. And a woman that's in touch with her feelings and emotions, she'll see that and feel that in you. And she'll either avoid it or just, create healthy boundaries around it, right? The same with your male friends. Like if you can get in touch with your anger, like your male friends will see that and feel that. And they're not going to trust you because deep down, they will not trust you because they'll see that you don't know where your edge is and you're not willing to admit it. And knowing, it doesn't matter where the edge is, but knowing where it is much more important, and admitting it to yourself and to others is much more important than pretending that it's somewhere else than it really is. Or the most dangerous, where you don't even know where it is and you're not aware that you don't know. That's where I've been.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's beautiful that you're beginning to see those emotions and those shadows as an invitation to go deeper.
Right.
And this is something that, I've been working a lot on. I just came back from Costa Rica, and this might actually, something I definitely want to share with you. I discovered during my time in Costa Rica, a direct correlation between my ideation and my natural propensity, and frankly, what I feel is a gift of innovation in my deepest childhood trauma. I was in a Watsu healing session, which for those who don't know, it's like you are in this perfect little container, no sight, no hearing. You're being held by an incredible healer. And I was going into my childhood, and I got to this point. I was like 8 years old. I was in my room, boom. I had this amazing idea for an app. And it blossomed like a giant flower right in front of my eyes and just took me. I was like, whoa, that's so brilliant. And I was like, hold the fuck on. Where did that come from? And I realized in this moment, this led me down this whole track, that a lot of my propensity to always be in a place of innovation, ideation, and creation is an avoidance strategy. For me going down my shadow's rabbit hole. And I had been avoiding all this deep work in the name of quote unquote work.
Right.
And I'd been using this business and these things, all my creations as escape mechanisms for actually looking at my anger, my sadness, my deepest strung out emotions. And so what I did is I turned off that part of me. I said, no more ideas, no more quote unquote innovations. I'm going to go into my shadow.
Yeah.
And I got into the habit of, oh, I feel jealous. Let's fucking go. I felt jealous in college. I felt jealous in high school. I felt jealous of my brother. And I just go all the way down to my childhood, all of my effort, not a fraction of it, all of it down into my shadow and pulled it all out. And by the time I got back to the present day, it was like rubbing dirt off my shoulder. No problem. So I find that what you're leaning into is an important mechanism. And I just recently discovered it. And that's by fully going into shadow. And what you're describing, I feel like it's important people know this. People fucking sense it.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to take that dive into your shadow and see that shadow as an opportunity to explore yourself, it's going to fuck you up in many ways more than one and will ultimately be detrimental to whatever you want to create, even though it's weirdly has this correlation to be a fuel too.
Yeah. Yeah. I am exactly the same 100%. Used all the work, the entire association with the hustle culture for me, and I wonder if for others as well, but I know for me, was an attempt to avoid feelings. And I would get into this robot mode, wake up at 5 and work all day until fucking night, go to sleep. And this addiction to like phones and constant entertainment and Instagram stories and swiping and 9gag and just like 24/7 entertainment is not relaxation, that's distraction. And I feel like we don't know the difference between relaxation and distraction. And that's very detrimental to our health because scrolling is distraction and avoidance of getting in touch with all of that stuff and dealing with all the crap in there. This incredible woman that I'm in a relationship with, she's been such a huge help on this journey as well. And because she's so in touch with her emotions and feelings and has done tremendous amount of work on herself and has given me incredible feedback that I could use and then like start doing all of this work. So she was a huge kind of trigger and leverage for me to go all in on this work. But I was exactly the same, 100% the same way. But it's a daily work. I still fall in there every once in a while. I think one reason why I'm lucky is because I was an athlete my whole life. And so I have a pretty good connection with my body. Like not just coordination, but understanding and knowing like what feels, certain sensations in your body, you can like have a pretty good sense better than the average. And that's actually what's saving me now, because I know physiologically how the burnout feels. It's a very specific sensation. For me, it's actually like a pressure building out in like the prefrontal cortex in this area of the brain inside. And it starts with like a tiny pressure and the full blown out result is a burnout. But now I know like the moment it comes up and then I can stop and be like, okay, what am I feeling here? What do I need to address? Let me do that. So before I would just use work to go down. And there's other sensations in the body. Like we all know how anxiety and stress feels like in our bodies, right? But most people just ignore it and power through. I think the gift is be able to stop and be like, okay, what does this mean? What do I feel? And the real genius, like the universe intelligence, comes through you when you actually open up and accept these things and dive deeper. There's a wonderful documentary called The Work. Have you seen it?
I believe I have.
Prison.
Yeah.
Right.
The guy goes into the prisons, does therapy with them.
Right. So there's this, a documentary called The Work. For those who haven't seen it, it's about a group of volunteers, about 20 guys who once a year go into a prison and meet up with about 20 inmates in there and do a group therapy session. Wonderful documentary. Highly recommend it. Interestingly, to me, it looked like it was mostly the inmates helping on the volunteers coming from the free world that were doing most of the work. But one quote that stood out to me that like really was opened my eyes, what you talked about, they said, the metaphorical medicine, the metaphorical healing for all the emotions are deep, deep down right next to the wound. And you have to dive deep in there, right next to the wound, to pick up the metaphorical medicine and the healing. And so it requires you to go in there and feel all of those things again. The documentary is incredibly powerful. Highly recommend it for everyone.
And that reminds me of one of my favorite mindsets. This comes from Ram Dass. Trauma healed is medicine. Trauma healed is medicine. And even, your own experience of going through burnout, going through all these crazy things, fact you've gotten through that trauma and now healed yourself and are encapsulating that medicine into a piece of software that can help others that go down those spiraling holes is a beautiful alchemization and a beautiful example of how this process can work.
Yeah, it's a very good way to say it. I agree 100%, but you don't have to be building software at scale. I think when you go through that stuff, it creates an incredible amount of depth inside of you. And that touches every single person you meet every single day.
Yeah, the way I see this is it's almost like a rubber band. It's like when I can actually stretch that rubber band all the way down to the deepest, darkest parts of myself, when it's ready to snap, and it'll fling back the other way with 100 times the force. And now your capacity for the holistic human experience, both the shadow and the light, has just expanded.
Right.
There's some people you meet that, haven't been to those depths that maybe you've been through.
Yeah.
Right. And I genuinely believe as a result of that might not have the capacity for the highest of the highs.
Yeah.
Right. I do believe there's a lot of beauty in going to that depth and increasing your emotional range.
Yeah. I think the depth is the key. Now I see it. And then you can see patterns in yourself so clearly as a result of the wounds. And then you see other people and like you see the pattern right away, and they don't see because they haven't gone through the depth yet. Mm-hmm. But it's like seeing the Matrix, right? You can step back and you're like, I see you're saying one thing, but I see the motivation behind it. And it's not a way to judge. It's just like, now I can create a boundary, protect my energy. And yeah, it gives you superpowers.
That's the funny thing about all this work. Because sometimes it feels like you're doing surgery on yourself. That's really hard to do. I had the beautiful opportunity. I've been practicing radical honesty since arriving back from Costa Rica. And I'm doing my best to bring that into every container I'm a part of. Man, I was given such a gift. People were analyzing me from every vector and showing me parts of myself that I could never recognize myself. Entering into those spaces of radical honesty, as tough as they might be and as like anti-strategy as they might feel, there's so much beauty in those sort of relationships. And if you have opportunities to practice that, whether it's in your intimate relationships or friendships, I highly encourage you to lean into it.
Yeah.
It's wild what can come up as a result of it.
Right. Yeah. That's why I think oftentimes when you're in a good romantic relationship, for example, that relationship is a perfect mirror. Because a lot of times, I think as a man, I think oftentimes women just have a gift of seeing things that you don't see. And it's not necessarily just masculine, feminine thing, but speaking from personal experience, a lot of things, I think it can be a perfect mirror and shows you parts of you that you were not ready or willing to admit or see. And only then you can work on them.
And meeting those things with love, that's the real challenge. Yeah. It's like when somebody points out some of your bullshit, you're like, tell me more. Kind of taking the gut, not taking it so personally.
Yeah.
And not having that initial reaction to fight back.
Yeah.
That a lot of us have cultivated over the years. You hit me, I hit you back.
Yeah. And that's a huge, mastery. That's again, that's a daily work of being able to stay open, whether it's romantic relationship or friendship or feedback or your investors or all of that, right? Staying open to it and not close down in the middle of a tornado. That's a beautiful practice.
I read this book is from the School of Life, and it talks about like the core essential elements of like, what makes someone really great. And one of the ones he put in the book, and I completely failed at this, was candor. Candor being the ability to hear when somebody's giving you feedback on some shit about yourself. I scored, it was like 0 out of 50. I scored like a 3 in candor based on how I answered the questions of the survey. And it occurred to me that I had become, and this is like a year ago, I would actually love to retake this quiz to see how I've evolved from this, but my candor ability was very low. Which means that if you were to tell me, if you're just taking that score as a baseline, you were to tell me a bunch of stuff, I might only pick up 6% of it. I might only integrate 2% of it. And I do believe that candor is one of those skills. it's not about accepting everything at face value, but really listening, really feeling into like this is this person's truth, and plucking out of that what really can serve you in that relationship at that time.
Yeah. That's why it's such a gift to be dating a woman that doesn't take any of your bullshit. Right?
I don't know what that's like. I feel like every woman every day is taking far too much of my bullshit.
It could be friendships as well, right? To have male friends who will call you out on your shit. That's such a gift.
And you touched on this a bit, when it comes to your friendships and some of the things you learned when a couple of years ago. How have you evolved, going back to that 360-degree view, to show up more holistically in the friendship container?
So actually, I've had a big realization lately, and I realized that I was a very self-obsessed, selfish person my entire life. Like very. When I would sit down in the morning to like visualize the future, like the good life, it was all about my money, my success, how I felt. All of it. There are some people in there, but if I'm being honest with myself, it was all about me. And being able to, look at that honestly and be like, oh wow, I'm really fucking self-obsessed, was hard to realize, and a huge gift, because we're all born with the ability to feel empathy, but it's a skill that we cultivate. And some people are naturally much higher, some people are lower, but if you ignore it, it'll go down. And I think my empathy was so low. I think I am high on sympathy. I can logically rationalize, understand, like this homeless person on a street was born in the wrong neighborhood, had the wrong parents, just made a few wrong decisions, and I was homeless. And I have a sympathy, but like I understand, this may not be entirely your fault. If I was born in your situation, I might be the same. And I thought that was empathy, but it's not. That's sympathy. Empathy is feeling what that person is feeling. And because I wasn't able to connect with my emotion because of ignoring all the negative emotions, I was not able to feel empathy. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of friendship now, because I'm just now learning empathy. And I'm turning 34 next week, and I'm just now realizing what empathy means and tapping into it. And so I think I'm just scratching the surface of what real friendship and real relationship and real openness and love to the whole world could be like. So I don't think I have an answer yet.
I say it's a pretty fucking good answer, brother. Darius, I love the work you're doing, both on the personal front and the professional front. It's been such an honor being around you for these last couple of years. And I'm so excited to see, what this evolves into in our little corner of the universe here in Lisbon, with all this incredible technology and empathy being applied at scale across all these different vectors. Thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for creating the platform and inviting me. I appreciate it, brother.
Deeply appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much.